Let's talk about NFL Week 12 and some of the absolutely mind-boggling things that happened. That is what we're going to start off with here on RotoViz Overtime on our first show of the week as we look back at the action. We will have our second part of the recap coming out as well on Wednesday. Wink, wink for people listening in. It will come out on Tuesday if you are subscribed to the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed to get that once it is available. Shawn, we are going to start off with what may have been the wildest fourth quarter, and particularly the last 2 minutes of a game that I've ever seen in my entire life. We have the Washington Commanders versus the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys obviously on a tough run at the moment in terms of wins and losses, but they win this one 34-26. And there's lots to talk about throughout the game. Shawn, this game was 3-3 at halftime. It was 10-9 at the end of the third quarter. There was 41 points scored in the fourth quarter, and that is also counting a missed PAT that happens after Jaden Daniels links up for an 83-yard touchdown pass with Terry McLaurin. 33 seconds left on the clock when that happened. No timeouts. Down 7 in their own end, basically end of the field. And they complete that touchdown pass. So it got pretty wild at that point. Looks like it's going to overtime. The PAT's missed. We get an onside kick for the Commanders. One more chance to try and get the ball back if they can. Nope. It's returned for a touchdown by the Dallas Cowboys special teams. So there was quite a lot of stuff happened here in the late part of this game. But looking through it, Shawn, we've talked recently actually about a lot of field goal trouble, and we've seen that this week again. And in this game, we've seen it between both sets of kickers. We had 2 missed field goal attempts by Aubrey in this one that kept the scoring low in that first half, as I mentioned. But looking through it, I guess the part to work through, CeeDee Lamb got there on volume in this game, which is a positive for him, because the quarterback play may be a lot worse than it was previously. But we have Jaden Daniels, and looking at some of his performances in recent weeks, maybe there's some cause for concern after a really hot start. They have lost the last 3 games, but I do think that he also looked a lot healthier this week and has started to maybe even last week look a bit healthier with the rib injury. Weeks 9, 10, and 11, he had 58 total rushing yards in that time. He had 74 rushing yards, and this one had a rushing touchdown as well to go with it. And I think it was just a game where the entire offense struggled. They lose Brian Robinson for a portion of time in this with an injury. Unfortunately, after all that stuff that I mentioned at the end of the fourth quarter, Austin Eckler did take a big hit on another return, and that meant that he obviously was carted off at that point, but that was at the very, very end of the game. Shawn, looking through it, I guess we'll kick on the Jaden Daniels side. He's 25 of 38, 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. I did mention that a lot of that yardage came on that late touchdown to Terry McLaurin, who finished with 102 yards and a touchdown on 5 targets. What are we making here of Daniels over the last kind of 5 or 6 performances? Is it a case that teams are having more tape on him? Is it a case that he was banged up and is now starting to get a bit healthier? Is it a case that outside of Terry McLaurin, it is limited in terms of what he's working with? What did you make overall of the Cowboys versus the Commanders here, and what had quite an incredible finish?
Yeah, so many things going on in this game, and as you describe the potential problems, it sort of brings me back to one of the few disappointing things this year in terms of prospects, which is that Ben Sinnott has not done anything for the Commanders, and they need him. This is a situation where if there has been a concern about Cliff Kingsbury that has not been washed away by this amazing season from Jaden Daniels, it's this preference for veteran players who don't really add anything. I mean, you think about the situation there with Trey McBride in Arizona. We now have another one where in any other situation, I would say, well, Sinnott just isn't good, right? You can't have Zach Ertz and John Bates out there running around and playing tight end if you have a rookie who can get the job done. But I mean, the fact of the matter is here that Kingsbury has done it before. So, I mean, you look at this game, one of the key pivot points when Washington more or less hadn't done anything was when Bates fumbles and they lose that possession on top of the other things that they were struggling with. I do think this is a team that has gotten very similarly to the Packers, is too caught up in how successfully they have run the ball. And you look at this game here where they don't, where Brian Robinson gets stuff, where Austin Eckler gets stuff, where almost every run play is a huge negative and is destroying the drives. Then you have fewer opportunities to move the ball down the field, effectively passing. Now, is the passing game less dominant and less dynamic than it was earlier in the season? It is, and certainly you would expect, or at least hope, to crush this Dallas Cowboys defense. But then that wraps back around to the idea that, I mean, this Washington Commanders team has very little talent, right? You have Terry McLaurin. I mean, he's a big play guy. He's not going to be one of these volume receivers for you. That score at the end of the game was absolutely hilarious. It was a phenomenal play by McLaurin. It was a great pass. He runs the route into the soft spot in the defense and then weaves his way down the field, where, as it was happening as a viewer, you're thinking he's going to score. As you're watching the Cowboys defenders, they seem to be thinking, well, we've got so many people back here. At some point, someone is going to tackle him. But no one ever went out of their way to actually go get it done. So you get that big play. You get all the points for Jaden Daniels. That part was exciting. Colm, I know that when you're the better team, forcing overtime is very appealing. But one of the things that was happening throughout this game is that kickers were struggling. Now, there may have been a variety of reasons for that. We did see in some games over the last couple of weeks that as the weather has gotten a little bit worse, that kickers are now struggling with the plant foot at times. But Siebert is also coming off of the injured list. And there was...
We're seeing some snap. The missed PAT was a pretty bad snap back as well. So we're like, it's kind of the mechanics of the kick, even outside of the weather or outside of any injuries, affecting these as well.
Yeah. You think about how many things can go wrong on that kick. And the teams are basically dealing with the overall percentages, right? So you're not thinking, oh, there are a lot of things that could go wrong on the kick. We could miss the snap. The holder could flub it, or the kicker could miss it. 3 different things could go wrong, even on a kick that is within range, even, the extra point there to tie the game at the end. But the flip side of that is simply that I pretty strongly believe that any of the teams with a mobile QB should go for 2 on a huge chunk of just their general possessions, but they should definitely go for 2 with the game on the line. And you watch some of the things that they had done with Jaden Daniels in this game to that point where he's back as a runner. And that was the thing that was the most obvious, is his ability to manipulate the defense, but just beat the defense. His ability to get the big chunk plays is back. If you have him, you have to go for it, right? You can't put a kicker who has already missed multiple kicks back there to kick again. There was a humorous moment sort of early in this game where the commentators are like, the offense has been very good to this point. Like, to this point, we've had 4 field goal attempts and 3 misses. I don't think 4 drives, 3 points, 3 missed field goals is great offense, even if you want to put that mostly on the special teams. You got to give the Dallas Cowboys a lot of credit for this game, because their defense did play well, even with the mistakes at the end. And Cooper Rush played well. CeeDee Lamb battled. I mean, this is a horrible Cowboys team. They shouldn't be able to go on the road and win. But you like to see NFL teams that continue to compete. And then you like to see fireworks at the end of games. Unless you are a diehard Washington Commanders fan, I mean, this game had everything.
Yeah, it had everything. The other thing, when we're saying it had everything, that I forgot, you mentioned the defense, the special teams as well. Turpin has a return shot in this game where it's kicked off to him. It bounces before it gets to his hands. It somehow goes through his legs without like deflecting. It then kind of bounces up perfect into his hands. So it's kind of like, well, he's probably just going to play it safe here. Shawn, he hits, I don't know what we want to call it. He hits the spin move. and he's gone. This is before that kind of scenario that I mentioned a moment ago. Because we got a rushing touchdown from Daniels, then we got that, then we got all that other stuff that happened after it. So yeah, this game had a lot of stuff. Another game, Shawn, that had a lot.
Oh, Turpin's return, one of the greatest non-Dante Hall touchdown returns of all time. That was super cool. I do think the play at the end with Eckler is another one that kind of underlines why we should have a different mechanic for what happens when a team scores, or at least some different options. And the commentators were talking about how impossible it is to recover an onside kick. A week ago on Ceiling Bananas, I made some comments about rule changes that I would like to see, even with all the craziness in this game. And again, including and especially because of some of the craziness, I do think that we need better mechanics for extra points and then what happens after and what we do with these kicks. It would make the games a lot more fun if Will Levis could take 15 billion sacks, throw 3 long touchdowns, but then also be able to get the ball back by somehow magically completing a 2-point conversion from the 30.
Okay, so we're Shawn's fictional thoughts on Will Levis and the NFL rules. I do want to expand at some point on the NFL rule changes. Maybe that's something for the offseason, Shawn, that we'll talk through. But I was fascinated by some of those suggestions that you did make to Ben on Stealing Bananas last week. One of the games, though, Shawn, you mentioned the onside kick. That was the Bears and the Vikings. The Vikings then winning that one in overtime, finishing 30-27. This one felt like it was going to be quite comfortable, though, for the Vikings as they kind of entered into that fourth quarter. But we had 17 points to just the 3 for the Bears versus Minnesota to tie that one up and take it to overtime. But lots of things, Shawn, had to happen for that to occur at the end. We had a touchdown to Keenan Allen that brought them back to, trying to get it all squared up. Then they get a 2-point conversion to DJ Moore, and then they get an onside recovery and a field goal to get it to overtime. So that game went a bit wild at the end when it was looking like it was going to be an easy win for the Vikings. Shawn, some great, I think, positives in this one, and I guess for Justin Jefferson managers, that would be a negative on their side. But we had a bounce back game. I know you haven't been Sam Darnold's strongest supporter, but he had 330 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions in this game. We had Aaron Jones, 22 rush attempts, 106 rushing yards, and a touchdown for him. He also fumbled inside the 5-yard line early in this game. So he could have had an even bigger day, 3 for 23 through the air on 4 targets. Justin Jefferson, I mentioned, 5 targets, 2 receptions for 27. But the big positives for the Vikings, Shawn, Jordan Addison, 9 targets, 8 receptions, 162, and a touchdown. Monster day for him. And TJ Hawkinson, back from his injury, has been working his way back in to the lineup over the last couple of weeks. He has 9 targets, 7 receptions for 114. I think, in terms of him being involved, really is going to benefit this offense. But just for a player that we have been big fans of seeing him back healthy, his right participation this week was 84%. Justin Jefferson, though, Shawn, on the opposite side that I touched on, he has averaged 19.7 PPR points at the start of the season before the last 3 games. The last 3 weeks, it's 9.8, 14.1, 4.7 this past week. So my question is Jordan Addison now the wide receiver 1 for the Minnesota Vikings? But joking aside, the opposite side of it is the Bears. Williams had 340 passing yards in this. He had 2 touchdowns. He did throw the ball 47 times. He took 3 sacks for 20 yards, including 1 really bad sack during this contest. But he had 6 for 33 on the ground. DeAndre Swift, 13 for 30. So they got really nothing going on the ground overall from the actual run game. We did get a Roschon Johnson 1-yard rushing touchdown. DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, all having nice days. But I think a lot of that, when we look through it, is going to be pushed on by the 47 pass attempts to 32 completions. We get 7 targets for Moore for 7 receptions, 106 and a touchdown. We get 15 targets for Keenan Allen, 9 for 86 and a touchdown. Cole Kmet gets 10 targets. Rome Odunze gets 10 targets. So I think that's volume based. I don't think a lot of that is going to be sticky, obviously, moving forward. But Shawn, this game, a lot of wild stuff happening in it as well. But what were some of your key thoughts?
So much of this is going to boil down to what you are rooting for as a fantasy manager. We've been enthusiastically looking forward to the time that Jordan Addison would come through and deliver on his potential. When we talk about players who are undervalued, one of the things that really jumps out is any situation where a certain stat is being bandied about to suggest that someone had concerns the previous season, even when they're extremely productive, if they've also been productive in all of the years leading up to that. Now, on the Addison side, one of the things I think that, at least for me, becomes very clear is that those two separate ankle injuries at the beginning of the season almost certainly did sap him to an extent that if he had come in healthy, he would have had an absolutely massive season. I've been pretty frustrated with Sam Darnold, his inability to get off of Justin Jefferson, so much forced volume to him. Now, if you're going to ever force volume to someone, Justin Jefferson is the guy to do it. He is the best receiver in the NFL. And so many of the plays that he has made to this point in the season have made Sam Darnold look like a viable starting quarterback when he is not. But we see in this game the type of performance that you get when you are spreading the ball around. So again, it's problematic for Justin Jefferson managers, but you're playing a team like the Chicago Bears at Chicago, have a very strong defense. And because you can play off of what the team is trying to do to take Justin Jefferson away, those big games for Addison and Hawkinson respectively, now Darnold looks like a viable NFL starting quarterback. And with Aaron Jones in there and probably a little bit healthier as well, you get more explosiveness from him. He has a strong performance. Again, very frustrating from fantasy perspective for Jefferson, but this Vikings team looked very, very good. The first time really all season, I think they have looked worthy of this record, even as they let the Chicago Bears come storming back. This is another game here, kind of as you mentioned, where Caleb Williams didn't look good. He had some missed throws. I was playing Rome Odunze in a league where I had benched Jerry Jeudy due to the conditions on Thursday night. It's a bit frustrating to lose a few points there, especially when Williams has Odunze open multiple times and misses him, including for a touchdown late. He just has to be a lot more accurate on his passes. It was sort of amusing in this one. Even as he's leading them back, he has Odunze open along the sideline and fires a pass to him that, I mean, Colm, if the stands were a little bit closer, it would have ended up in the stands. It was sort of the short yardage version of that throw a couple of weeks ago from Patrick Mahomes, where Xavier Worthy is open for a 60-yard touchdown, and Mahomes throws it like 5 yards wide of the field. At least on that, he's got to triangulate a pass that's downfield. I mean, this one from Odunze or to Odunze, yeah, it's like a 10-yard pass throwing 5 yards out of bounds. But you love to see the competitiveness. Everything about this offense has changed now that we have the new coordinator. They did still have some hiccups, even doing things like getting plays in. You would expect those types of things, I think, when you have this coordinator situation. This is also a deal here where I think you look at Keenan Allen and you say, if he doesn't have those injury issues at the beginning of the season, then he's going to have a massive year. The 15 targets in this one, he does get the touchdown on, it's kind of a blown coverage at the end. Caleb Williams keeps the play alive, and suddenly the three different defenders who were covering Keenan Allen all simultaneously as a group decide to rush Caleb Williams, at which point he dumps it over the top of those guys. You get the really fun onside kick recovery in this game. These two to start, Cowboys, Commanders, and Vikings, Bears. You love to see the competitiveness. You love to see the young QBs play well. There's a lot to still be answered about Caleb Williams, and you're not going to get 47 passing attempts every game, but I mean, this is what we were looking for and expecting to start the season. You have 4 studs, and they get 15, 10, and 7 targets respectively. And DJ Moore, who got the 7 targets, also gets a rushing attempt, but he's the one who ends up with the most yardage. I think you can be enthusiastic again about playing your Bears down the stretch of the 2024 season if all of your teams with Bears are not eliminated.
Moving on, Shawn, to another rookie quarterback. We've kind of been going through some of the rookies. Now, another rookie coming up after this that I'm very interested to get your thoughts on. But we will go through this game, I think, pretty quickly, because a lot of the stuff we've talked about in recent weeks about one Bo Nix has basically similar this week, continues to play well, look a lot. And obviously, he's an older rookie, but look mature and what he's doing, calling the offense and so on, 2 passing touchdowns in this one. His rushing has cooled off over the last couple of weeks. It'll be interesting to see as well. We're looking at he's now having more passing touchdowns, but less rushing points over the course of the season. I think that gives you a little bit of a floor. The games that they're behind, maybe there will be more rushing involved. This was a game, though, where their rushing attack and their rushing attack has been a mess over the last couple of weeks in terms of the usage. They've 22 total rushes for 63 yards. Audric Estime had been worked in. He had 87% of the running back rushes in week 10. He's down to 16 this week, played just 5 snaps, Shawn. The way it's switching about week to week is pretty wild, and that backfield, hard to trust anything moving forward, really. But Shawn, the part that I want to talk about on the Broncos side is both Courtland Sutton and Devon Vele. Courtland Sutton, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 91, and 2 touchdowns. Vele has 9 targets, 6 receptions, and 80 yards to go with it. He has been pretty good in that wide receiver 2 role for the Broncos in recent weeks. He's kind of getting into the mid-teens in terms of PPR points. But Courtland Sutton, Shawn, has been a top 10 wide receiver in 3 of the last 4 weeks. He's getting all the targets he can handle in this offense. And Bo Nix and him are really having a connection. And I'll put my hands up. I'm a former Courtland Sutton stan. But that had kind of worn off over time. It had become very frustrating. But he has looked tremendous these last couple of weeks. And, we can't really continue, I think, to boast about Bo Nix and how great we think Bo Nix is and not give some credit here to Courtland Sutton in terms of what he has been doing performance-wise. What is your thoughts here on Courtland Sutton and what he is doing to help elevate Bo Nix, or is it Bo Nix completely elevating Sutton? Because some of these catches Sutton's making have been really impressive recently.
Yeah, you're getting the full package from Sutton too. He's making the spectacular plays in the end zone. He's taking some of those short routes where Nix is leading him into contact, so he's taking some big hits and holding on. He's making some big plays down the field. This is everything you need from an alpha receiver. And as you mentioned, in the recent past, he's been fantastic. Since the beginning of week 9, only Jamar Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown have scored more points, and Amon-Ra has him just by a sliver. He's ahead of Cooper Kupp. He's ahead of Jaxon Smith and Njigba, who has played 1 less game. But that's the group that you want to see him in, especially if you're going to move guys like Jerry Jeudy and then try and build up this young staff behind him. I think that one of the things you have to be enthusiastic about is that Vele looks so good, but you're now using Marvin Mims in a role that seemingly is a fit for him. And even if the volume isn't going to be there for fantasy, he helps from a reality perspective to make everything else in this work here. We have Troy Franklin as the next player involved. I think the disappointing thing in this one is that Nix has thrown the ball down the field well in stretches. Certainly after the early season, he's looked pretty good. Mostly he threw the ball well in this game, but there were a couple of deep targets where he didn't get his feet set. And I mean, those passes looked like Russell Wilson passes where you're like, maybe the ball will come down on top of players, but it has nothing to do with where I'm actually throwing it. The wounded ducks were a little bit disconcerting. He's going to have to make sure he does get the feet down. One of the things that helps with Nix is he has so much athleticism that he can throw on a variety of platforms and off platform and on the run, trying to really push the ball deep down the field while you don't have your feet on the ground and your body is kind of going the wrong direction. That's probably a throw he can't make. Certainly didn't make in this game, but you're seeing the combination of what Nix can do and what Sean Payton can do from a play calling perspective, even in a game where Nix played poorly. I think this is one of his worst games since maybe week 2. You end up with a good fantasy performance. So that part has to be very encouraging for fantasy managers. And this team has become all about him. You mentioned the running game. For Audric Estime and Javonte Williams to combine for 13 rushing yards, you just have to lean into the humorous element of it. But Colm, the big storyline in this one, Patrick Surtain and the Denver Broncos were finally able to keep Brock Bowers in check. It always felt like he was on the verge of going off. You had some catch-up time late where he was heavily targeted. He did get the 10 targets in this game. He got a couple of end zone targets late. One was batted down. The previous one was a flagrant pass interference in the end zone that the officials were like, well, the defensive back is much smaller. We'll let him come completely through the back of Bowers. But I think, again, this is one of the reasons the Denver Broncos are so good, and you have to give a lot of credit to them. They had a game plan to take away Bowers. Now, the flip side of that is that Jacoby Myers absolutely went off. The 10 catches, 121 yards. He looked fantastic. He's a guy where he's probably never going to be an actual star. He may be buried on these teams that aren't particularly good, but you think about how little energy and enthusiasm they were getting from Devontae Adams. For Adams to get moved and for Myers to show up the way he has been showing up, for him to be such a good fit with Gardner Minshew as well, I think you love to see that. It's a great storyline. And the disappointing thing here is just the Gardner Minshew does take the big hit late.
Yeah.
Colm, I don't have information on that as we're recording. What do you know anything about the outlook for Minshew?
Yeah, he's out for the season. So obviously out for the season at this point is a shorter term, but sounds like a broken collarbone, which is going to take that time to recover. Desmond Ridder came in. We've talked about Desmond Ridder when he came in earlier in the season. I don't think he's the answer here at quarterback either. But another person who may not be the answer, but Aidan O'Connell, people remember, may not care. He broke his thumb, I think about 5 weeks ago. So maybe he is going to get back in the picture here. That was usually a 5 to 6 week injury. So we might see him. I know when Minshew was, heading to the locker room, they were showing him in his street clothes on the sideline. So we'll keep open to reports on that and how that'll affect, this team moving forward. But Myers, Shawn, since Devontae Adams was traded, has averaged 29% target share per game for the Raiders. So he has, shown some nice things in that time as well. Positive note, Shawn, and Brock Bowers, 74th reception of the season recorded in this. He passed Jerry Rice, who had 73 receptions for the most receptions by a Raider through 11 games. Pointless history fact there for people who are...
I think the takeaway is better than Jerry Rice.
That's a future Hall of Famer, Brock Bowers. Shawn, the next player that I do want to talk about is I think this might have been the one that I'll say... Brock Bowers was your boy, but Bucky Irvine, I think you were higher on than pretty much anyone else this offseason. He had 12 carries for 87 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He had 6 targets for 6 receptions and 64 yards in the air. Looks tremendous in this particular contest. He had a 56-yard rush. He had a 32-yard reception. He outsnapped Rashad White in this game, the first time when they've both been healthy this season that has occurred. He also ran 20 routes to White's 11. Obviously, a lot of White's value has come in the receiving game. I thought he looked excellent. And I think even though he looked excellent, Shawn, one of the highlights of this was the long rush that he has Baker Mayfield leading with the block at the halfway line. He catches up with him to lay that block for his running back. Baker having some highlight plays over the course of this season, also had a rushing touchdown in this one, which was a lot of fun. Tracy on the opposite side, Tyrone Tracy, did have a fumble on a wildcat play in the red zone, which kind of seen his work cut short for the day. Moving forward after that, we did have a rushing touchdown for Devin Singletary, who just 2 carries in the game. Shawn, on Bucky Irvine's touchdown, we did get Sean Tucker in for 2 carries on that at the goal line. He goes 2 for 0 on that. He goes 4 for 3 for 1 touchdown on the day. They had him in on the goal line work on those scenarios, but Irvine then did come in to punch that one in on the one that I mentioned. He could stop twice at the goal line. But Irvine, Shawn, we talked about his size and things like that, but Are we looking here at a post-bye rookie breakout? Even though we've seen everything so far, is this where the wheels really come up and take off for Bucky here?
I mean, part of it is just the New York Giants defense. I was promoting him and Tracy in the Zero RB universe last week. The GLSP really liked both of them. I thought that unless the Buccaneers came out and did something really weird in this game, that Irving was going to destroy even the somewhat enthusiastic projections. So I did play him in some crucial spots ahead of players who were projected for more. He just is too good, and the Giants defense is too bad. And I say, unless the Bucks do something really weird, and they did kind of try, right? The news coming out of Tampa this week was that their internal scout, their internal evaluation over the bye week was they needed to get Sean Tucker more involved. And I think everyone in the world was thinking, I mean, yes, objectively, you probably do. That little dude is awesome. But how are you going to do it? Because Bucky Irving has been one of the 5 best running backs in the NFL. His peripherals are out of this world. Are you going to get Sean Tucker more involved at his expense, or is it going to be at Rachaad White's expense? You get that early goal line touchdown, and you're thinking, oh no, I mean, this is going to be something that just completely cannibalizes the scoring. You mentioned the touchdown. Irving was also tackled at the 1 yard line twice in this game. And so it could have been even bigger. I do think Tucker's struggles at the goal line probably help Irving's outlook as we look forward. But one of the things here, and one of the things that Ben and I talked about a ton on Stealing Bananas during the offseason, was just that Irving was going to look better than Rachaad White as a runner. And then at some point, if you look better than the starter as a runner, even if they're actually a very good receiver, which Rachaad White is, right? We have to give him credit for that, even if from the pure running perspective, he's probably down there in the Zamir White range. If you were that much better and you're also a plus receiver coming out of college, then you're going to take that work as well. Probably. There's at least a scenario that is a dagger for White where that happens. And this was the game where it kind of looked like, again, in terms of how they evaluated themselves, they said, look, Bucky Irving breaks and forces more missed tackles. He evades more total tackles than basically anybody in football. Why are we making this tiny little dude do it in tight spaces? And they were throwing him the ball. If they throw the ball to him like this the rest of the way, then, you're going to need Saquon Barkley-like performances to beat him. Colm, as we finish out this first show here, we do want to a little tip of the cap to Barkley. It was kind of funny. I worked through the games, as the listeners know, kind of one by one. I was doing some traveling this week. I'm in Kansas City. That was a 24-hour drive. Yesterday's events pushed things a little bit later. So I'm at 4:00 in the morning last night trying to decide, can I get one more game in or will it break me? So I did not watch Sunday Night Football. Colm, I mentioned to you that I hadn't watched it, but that I'd gotten the suggestion from you and Ben that it hadn't particularly gone well. And you were like, suggestion. So it seems like Saquon Barkley has had a solid Sunday Night Football game.
Solid game. I think we should give him his flowers. The way it has worked out, we haven't got a chance to talk about him a lot. He was a player that we weren't drafted. I don't think I have a single team with Barkley on it, which hurts every time we see one of these games. But I'm sending emails to Shawn, basically like, Saquon Barkley has absolutely destroyed us in the main event in terms of trying to get that team through. Now, actually, it looks like if we get a scenario where we get 16 points from one particular team tonight, we may make our way through, Shawn, through the playoffs next week. So we'll see if that can occur. But yeah, suggestion was probably light on it. But Saquon Barkley had an amazing performance on Sunday Night Football against the Rams. The Eagles get the win. He now has a career rushing a season rushing total of 1,316 yards. That surpasses his previous high of 1,312. Still 6 more games to go, Shawn, to add to that. He had 302 total yards, 2 total touchdowns, and he also had 2 of those touchdowns being over 70 yards. So pretty incredible when you go through some of the historic numbers on the season, though, Shawn. Only 2 games this season, in week 10 and week 6, that he was under 78 yards. Every other game he's been over 100. Shawn had 500 scrimmage yards in the last 2 games when you combine week 11 and week 12 together. He is on course, if this continues, which, I do not think it probably continues the entire rest of the season, but he is on course to potentially break the scrimmage yards record if he can do that. But tremendous performance. He's been highlight after highlight. Anything in terms of like fade in production this season has been swept out. And the crazy thing is, Shawn, it could even be bigger if he, Hurts. We talked recently about Hurts and taking away some of the goal line. He could be
having a much bigger year.
So he has now, Shawn, had 5 30-plus point games this season. David Johnson, his great 2016 season, had 6 of those. Todd Gurley in 2018 had 7 of those. Christian McCaffrey in 2019 did it 8 times. So I mentioned there's 6 games left to go. So he's getting into incredible territory with these performances. So we'll see what happens for him and the Eagles moving forward. But yeah, Saquon Barkley is an absolute league destroyer this year. And realistically, if you look through, what has happened in baseball in particular, if you drafted him or you drafted Jamar Chase, you're just like you're right up at the top, really. You need to put the rest of the roster together, but those 2 guys are changing those advance rates dramatically. But that is where we're going to end it on today's episode, giving Saquon Barkley some flowers at the end of the show. And as we close it up, we will be back with that edition, as I mentioned, the Wednesday edition. If you're subscribed on the RotoViz Overtime podcast feed, you'll get it on Tuesday afternoon. We will go through some of the remainder of the games as we kind of have a look through some of the second-year quarterbacks and how they have either taken that step forward or maybe are having some sophomore struggles. My name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back, have a good one.